The hood came off. Blinding light. I was in a penthouse, not a warehouse, facing a man named Ken, tattooed, obsidian eyes. He pointed at a photo. "You were supposed to be Lydia Vance, the senator's courier." I swallowed. "I'm Lucy Carter, archives assistant. Please, let me go." Ken slammed a tablet down. "Wrong girl, an amateur mistake." Relief lasted 1 second. He stepped around the desk, his shadow swallowing me whole. "You saw my face. You know our weakness. I can't afford to clip you, but I certainly can't afford to release you." He offered a chilling smile. "Welcome to your new life." Why did the Mafia Boss keep the wrong girl? And what secret did I just become a weapon for? The thick carpet silenced the sound of my sneakers as I was shoved into the center of the room. The transition from the blind, metallic chill of the van to this overpowering warmth and light was a physical shock. A massive crystal chandelier hung above, blazing down onto a room that screamed old, unearned wealth. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cigar smoke and polished mahogany. And then there was Ken. He sat behind a desk that looked like a salvaged cathedral altar, massive and dark. He matched the fleeting image I'd caught. Dark, slicked-back hair, eyes like chipped obsidian, and a jaw carved from granite. His black shirt was tailored, and his heavily tattooed forearms, resting casually on the desk, were adorned with silver rings that glinted in the chandelier's glare. He looked less like a criminal and more like a CEO of violence, perfectly composed while his 3 masked goons stood like statues behind me. "You're awake," Ken stated, his voice the low, resonant rumble of a powerful engine. He held a high-resolution photo in one hand and a thin, leather-bound portfolio in the other. He didn't look at me. He looked at the photo. "Who are you? Why am I here?" I managed, forcing the words past the dry terror in my throat. My voice trembled, but the question was firm. Ken finally lifted his eyes, and the sheer coldness of his dark gaze made me flinch. It was the detached appraisal a butcher might give a cut of meat. "I am Ken, and you, miss, were supposed to be the daughter of Senator Alistair Vance, a woman named Lydia Vance. She was supposed to be leaving the Capitol Hill Legislative Library carrying this." He tossed the portfolio onto the desk. A bronze Senate seal was stamped discreetly into the leather. I stared at the portfolio, then back at him. I work at the city archives. My name is Lucy Carter. I don't know who Lydia Vance is." Ken leaned back, a flicker of something that looked like disbelief, or worse, annoyance crossing his face. He picked up a phone, spoke 2 curt, foreign words, and seconds later, another man entered, handing him a tablet. Ken scrolled through it, his expression hardening. "Lucy Carter, age 24. Income, negligible. Asset, a mountain of student debt. You carry the same cheap polyester satchel, leave the same block at the same time, and have a vaguely similar profile to the target's courier," Ken said, slamming the tablet down. "Wrong girl. My men mistook the city archives exit for the legislative library entrance. An amateur mistake that will cost someone dearly." Relief warred with paralyzing terror. "Then let me go. I swear I won't say a word. I know nothing about senators or portfolios." Ken stood, circling the desk with a predator's slow, measured grace. He stopped directly in front of me, his physical presence overwhelming the small bubble of air I was trying to breathe. "You saw my face. You know my operation captured someone important, even if it wasn't you. And more importantly, I now know that Vance has a secret courier, an unassuming girl who fits your profile, leaving the archives with his most sensitive records. And that makes you..." He paused, his chilling smile finally breaking through the mask of annoyance. "A loose end I can't afford to clip, but one I certainly cannot afford to release." He lowered his voice, the menace in it tightening like a zip tie. "I need to know everything about that archive, the guards, the blind spots, the codes. And you, Miss Carter, are going to be my eyes and ears. Welcome to your new life." Why would a powerful man like Ken risk keeping an innocent witness, confirming his own operation was flawed? Is his need for the senator's records truly so desperate? Or is he already sensing the trap being laid by his enemies? If you're enjoying the story, click subscribe, like the video, and tell me where you're watching from. Your support helps us to bring more interesting stories like this, and you don't want to miss it. The zip ties snapped open with a sound like a tiny gunshot, a jarring punctuation mark on Ken's final, chilling declaration. My wrists were raw and deeply indented, but the physical pain was overshadowed by the dizzying realization that I was neither dead nor free. I was currency. I was an asset. I belonged to the Mafia Boss. Ken gestured curtly to the tallest of his masked men. Marco, get Miss Carter settled. Ensure she has every amenity a library science graduate could require, and ensure she doesn't wander past the perimeter of the 4th floor. The man he called Marco was Ken's shadow, silent and scarred. He didn't wear a mask now. His face was a slab of granite, marked with a deep pale line that ran from his temple to his jaw. His eyes, devoid of emotion, simply absorbed everything. Marco's grip on my elbow was impersonal, efficient, and unbreakable. He ushered me out of the mahogany office and into the belly of the compound. The luxury was staggering. We ascended in a private elevator lined with smoked glass and brushed steel, bypassing several floors until the doors opened onto a breathtaking panorama, a penthouse suite that swallowed the entire city skyline. It was a prison built of silk sheets, Italian marble, and floor-to-ceiling windows. The living space was minimalist, yet decadent. The bedroom featured a king-sized bed that looked softer than a cloud. Yet I knew the doors were keyed, the windows were bulletproof, and every square inch was monitored. This was my golden cage. Marco gave me a brief, one-sided tour, his voice a low, gravelly monotone that matched his physical roughness. The safe room door is there. Do not touch the panels. Do not touch the windows. The staff will bring anything you request, including books. The perimeter is monitored. Do you understand, Lucy Carter? I merely nodded, focusing on the sheer weight of his threat. Marco was the constant, silent reminder that my contract with Ken was written in fear, not ink. My immediate task was waiting on a small glass table, the senator's leather-bound portfolio, flanked by a brand-new, high-end laptop. Ken had wasted no time. My first night of captivity was to be spent earning my continued existence. I opened the portfolio. It contained encrypted digital files and several pages of dense, cross-reference schedules, detailing deliveries and payments to various municipal departments. It was exactly the kind of material only a person deeply familiar with the city's archive and logistical scheduling a person like me could decipher quickly. Ignoring the thrum of terror, I allowed the archivist in me to take over. I analyzed the dates, the coded abbreviations, and the location prefixes, instantly recognizing a pattern that had nothing to do with finance and everything to do with access to old public infrastructure blueprints. In under an hour, I had identified 3 key transfer points that Ken's team had missed, buried in the jargon of old zoning permits. I had proven my value. The terror was now mingled with a twisted sense of professional pride and overwhelming disgust. Late that evening, Marco returned to the suite with a tray of food, leaving the double doors ajar. I was in the library nook, pretending to read, but the archival part of my brain was still cataloging sounds. I heard Ken enter the adjacent study, his commanding voice softer, more dangerous than before. The intelligence was flawed, Marco, Ken's voice hissed. The courier was never carrying the documents last night. It was bait. Vance knew we were coming. Marco's response was a low growl. It stinks of Mendoza, boss. They fed us bad intel, knowing the target location would be exposed. They wanted you to move too early, fail publicly, and waste resources. It was an assassination attempt on your reputation, not a theft. The blood drained from my face. This wasn't a random mistake. It was a trap. The botched kidnapping. My presence, it wasn't bad luck. It was an intentional act of war orchestrated by the Mendoza Cartel to expose Ken's weaknesses. I realized the chilling truth. Ken hadn't kept me just to find the senator's records. He had kept me because releasing me would confirm his tactical error, give the Mendoza Cartel leverage, and signal his vulnerability to the world. My life was no longer protected by my irrelevance, but by Ken's desperate need for control. I was a crucial shield in a war I didn't even know existed. My survival depended entirely on Ken winning, and I had no choice but to help him. The morning light filtering through the penthouse windows felt sterile and unwelcome. The realization that my kidnapping was a deliberate, sophisticated ambush by a rival cartel. The Mendoza Cartel did not lessen my fear, but it focused it. My fear was no longer general. It was specific, directional, and tied entirely to Ken's success. If he failed, I was not just a mistake. I was his collateral damage, a witness his rivals would undoubtedly eliminate. Marco returned before noon, silent as ever, and escorted me back to Ken's main office. Ken was exactly where I had last seen him, but the desk was now cleared, displaying only a vast, schematic blueprint of the city archives building, overlaid with red and blue markings. "Sit," Ken commanded, not looking up. He was wearing a different tailored suit, and the air around him still hummed with tense authority. "We have 3 days before Vance moves his assets. We need to secure the transfer route. Your expertise is in the mundane, Miss Carter. I need you to translate bureaucratic invisibility into tactical advantage." The tension between us was a live wire. Ken was demanding and professional, treating me with the cold respect one grants a highly valuable, necessary tool. I, in turn, was precise, bordering on robotic, channeling my simmering resentment into meticulous detail. Ken pushed a section of the blueprint toward me. My men identified the obvious: perimeter fences, loading dock security, and the main surveillance grid. Where are the blind spots? The service tunnels? The places a civilian courier would feel safest, but where my people can move unseen. I stared at the map. It was beautiful in its complexity, layers of architectural design that represented years of public works and maintenance records I had practically memorized. This was my world, the quiet, ethical foundation of my entire life, and Ken was asking me to hand over the keys to its destruction. This was the true test, my moral breaking point. Each line I drew, each detail I confirmed, was a small act of betrayal against the system I had dedicated my life to preserving. "The system is why you have no money and no future," Ken's voice echoed in my head. A perverse justification for treason. I swallowed the metallic taste of panic. I confirmed the standard camera blind zones behind the large air filtration units. I pointed out the weak link in the night shift's brake rotation and the outdated magnetic locks on the south wing's fire escape. But as I traced the path of the sub-basement infrastructure, my finger hovered over an unlabeled section of the building's foundation. It was the main steam tunnel access decommissioned in the 1980 seconds, but still structurally sound, located beneath a rarely used janitorial closet on the second floor. It was the deepest, most secure, and most forgotten passage in the entire complex. I looked up at Ken. His dark eyes were fixed on my face, waiting, assessing. He knew I was hesitating. I quickly moved my finger past the tunnel. "The main utility line runs here," I stated, tapping an innocuous yellow line. "It's too noisy and high traffic to be useful. The real weakness is the external access gate. It uses a 30-year-old keycard system tied to a single, easily manipulated master server in the basement." I spoke quickly, decisively, burying the lie under a cascade of credible facts. I had deliberately omitted the emergency steam tunnel. It wasn't for Ken. It was my one piece of private leverage, my escape route, my trump card. If Ken's operation went sideways, if the Mendoza Cartel broke in, that forgotten tunnel was the only thing standing between me and being a sacrificial lamb. I worked through the afternoon, drawing, labeling, and detailing the bureaucratic weaknesses of the city's record system. As the light outside began to fade, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk, I slumped back, mentally exhausted. Ken watched me, his expression unreadable. Then, he did something utterly unexpected. He reached under his desk and pulled out a leather-bound book, sliding it across the polished surface toward me. It was a first-edition volume of The Preservation of Ephemeral Municipal Records, a rare 1,922 text I had casually mentioned during a late-night, despairing conversation with myself the day before. "I prefer my assets well-maintained, Miss Carter," Ken said, the statement devoid of warmth, yet terrifyingly intimate. You looked tired. Read something useful. We start tonight. He then leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desktop, his focus returning instantly to the map. Vance is moving his assets tonight. The window is closing. My men intercepted a coded message. Now, here is where you earn your keep, Lucy. We execute the initial distraction tonight. If my enemies fall, we talk about your contract, your money, and your freedom. If they find you first, know that I won't be around to protect you. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting, leaving me alone with the map, the expensive book, and the chilling realization that my fate was about to be decided on the battleground I had just helped blueprint. Did Ken truly fall for Lucy's carefully constructed blind spots? Or is the secret steam tunnel the very weakness he expects her to use? What is the cost of Ken's chilling attentiveness, a calculation of value, or something more dangerous? The penthouse suite was swallowed by the oppressive darkness of the city's early hours. I sat in the vast living room, curled on the silk sofa, the rare archival text lying open and untouched in my lap. The book was useless. The dry academic prose could not compete with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The apartment, my gilded cage, was now the staging ground for a war. The operation was in motion. Hours ago, Ken had left, a silent, lethal force in the wake of his men. The air in the compound had grown heavy with a tense, sudden quiet. The security patrols I had grown accustomed to hearing the soft footfalls, the crisp radio chatter were now gone, channeled into the city archives' adjacent service building. Based on the maps I had drawn, they were attempting to secure the senator's assets from the unassuming courier at the precise moment of transfer, just as the early morning shift change created a momentary vulnerability in the keycard system. I had access to the satellite television, but the news was useless, too slow to register a high-stakes organized crime maneuver. I watched the skyline instead, searching for anything, a flash of emergency lights, a distant siren that would tell me if my secret omission, the untouched steam tunnel, would be enough to give Ken the edge, or if my betrayal of the archives had been in vain. My chest felt tight, not just from fear, but from the crushing weight of the moral line I had stepped across. Every shadow, every muffled sound from the floor below, was a potential casualty of the information I had meticulously provided. Then, a sound cut through the silence that ripped me violently back to the present. It wasn't a siren or a gunshot. It was an internal alarm, a deep, resonant, continuous bellow that seemed to originate from the heart of Ken's compound, not the external archive building, and it was a code I didn't recognize. My own system knowledge screamed that this was wrong. The primary fire alarm was a shrill, pulsing tone. The security breach alarm was a rapid, high-pitched chirp. This sound, this deep, guttural bellow, meant failure, and it was localized right here. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs, convinced Ken's operation had failed, and the enemy was already inside. The doors to the penthouse burst inward with a crash that shattered the sterile silence. It wasn't the measured entrance of a housekeeper or a low-level guard. It was Marco. His face was a mask of cold fury, his scarred jaw clenched so tight I could hear the grinding of his teeth, and his expensive jacket was ripped down the front. He crossed the 20 feet of polished marble in 2 strides, grabbing my arm with a crushing, non-negotiable force. "We've been double-crossed," he snarled, dragging me toward the far wall, away from the elevator. His voice was laced with a chilling mixture of rage and panic, 2 emotions I never thought Ken's lieutenant was capable of showing. "Not by you, Miss Carter." The senator changed the drop point at the last minute. It was another layer of bait. "Mendoza is waiting for us." My legs struggled to keep pace with his frantic speed. The bellowing alarm grew louder, and I could finally make out distant, muffled shouts and the distinct, unmistakable sound of automatic gunfire from somewhere below. This was not a smooth operation. This was a violent, chaotic ambush. Marco slammed me against the wall near the hidden safe room door, his body momentarily shielding me. He ripped a panel off the wall, exposing a dark recess behind the silk wallpaper. It was not the safe room. It was a metal door, circular and small, exactly like the access points I used to catalog for old maintenance schematics. "Move!" Marco threw the rare book from my lap, shoved me, hard, toward the opening. "Get in. This is a maintenance line. Ken's line. Nobody outside of us knows about it." I fell, scrambling on my knees toward the dark hole. Claustrophobia hit me instantly, but Marco's rage was a far more urgent threat. My breath hitched, trapped in my throat, as I plunged into the tight, metallic dark. I realized, with sickening certainty, that the true scale of the ambush was enormous. Ken hadn't been defeated in the archive. He had been attacked in his own fortress. I was trapped within the compromised heart of a mafia war zone, and my secret knowledge was the only thing that could save me now. I was trapped in the dark. The circular maintenance hatch, Ken's secret escape route, had sealed behind me with a heavy, echoing clank, plunging me into absolute, suffocating darkness. The air was stale, thick with dust and the metallic scent of old machinery. The alarm's continuous bellow was now a deafening resonance in the cramped space, accompanied by the terrifying soundtrack of a gunfight raging somewhere above and below. I scrambled forward on hands and knees, the coarse concrete floor tearing at my thin clothes. Marco had saved me, but his action was purely tactical. He had shoved a valuable asset into the safest available compartment. My survival was now entirely my responsibility. Claustrophobia clawed at my throat, but the fear of the Mendoza Cartel, the cartel that orchestrated this entire ambush, was a stronger motivator. I focused on the only thing I had. My memory. Ken's tunnel, Marco had said. But all buildings, even mafia compounds, had to comply with basic utility schematics, and I was fluent in the arcane language of city blueprints. Ventilation access, utility junctions, decommissioned service lines. I moved by feel, following the curve of the tunnel wall. The tunnel was too clean to be a primary sewer line, too small for a freight track. It was a pressure conduit, likely running parallel to a defunct water main. I remembered, from an old city archive map I had digitized months ago, that the structure Ken had repurposed had a single, rarely used boiler service entrance on the eastern facade, overlooking a forgotten pedestrian alleyway. I pressed myself against the damp, cold wall, listening to the cacophony of the war zone above. I could hear heavy bootfalls running past the metal door I had entered, and the frantic, clipped shouts in a language that wasn't Italian, confirming the Mendoza invasion. East facade access. I needed a maintenance junction. I felt along the wall, my fingers scraping over cold rivets and flaking paint, until I hit an aluminum plate and inspection hatch. My training kicked in. I knew the standard maintenance lever mechanism. With a grunt, I managed to force the stiff lever down. The panel slid aside, revealing a small, dizzying drop into a secondary, vertical ventilation shaft. It was narrow, smelling strongly of soot and exhaust, but it ran down, exactly where the boiler service entrance should be. I dropped, skinning my palms, and slid down the smooth metal, landing with a jarring thud on a grate at the bottom. I pushed the final hatch open and emerged, gasping, into a storage room. It was pitch black, filled with stacked boxes of cleaning supplies. I scrambled through the clutter, finding a heavy, fire-rated door marked Boiler Service Only. I yanked the deadbolt, threw the bar, and burst out into the night air. I was free. The relief was instantaneous, overwhelming, and utterly intoxicating. I stood in a narrow, trash-strewn alleyway, the sounds of the shootout suddenly distant, muted by the stone walls of the surrounding buildings. The cold night air hit my face clean, honest, and free. I started running. I didn't care where, only away. I made it 3 full steps before I was tackled from the side with brutal, calculated force. The breath was knocked from my lungs as I hit the ground, the impact sending a blinding white flash across my vision. A heavy weight pinned me down. I thrashed wildly, but the attacker's grip was like iron. "No, Miss Carter," a voice sneered above me. It wasn't Ken's accent. This was rougher, sharper, and filled with savage triumph. The false courier. We knew Ken would try to cut his loose ends. but we never thought he'd try to use his escape route too. My eyes, adjusting to the gloom, focused on the man above me. He wasn't wearing Ken's elegant black leather. He wore dark tactical gear, and on his left hand, glinting dully in the reflected street lamp light, was a massive, ornate silver ring, the trademark of the Mendoza Cartel's enforcers. He hadn't been chasing me. He had been waiting for me. The Mendoza man pulled a heavy, matte black pistol from his belt and pressed the muzzle against my temple. You saw the boss's face. Archive girl. Now you die for his mistake. The alleyway was suddenly illuminated by two blinding white headlights. A sleek, black luxury sedan. Ken's car screeched to a halt, the tires smoking on the pavement. The driver's side door flew open, and Ken emerged. He was covered in blood, his tailored shirt torn, but he moved with a terrifying, primal urgency I had never witnessed. The Mendoza man spun the gun toward the new threat, but Ken was already moving. A flash, a deafening roar. The Mendoza man gave a guttural cry and crumpled sideways, his grip immediately gone. Ken stood over me, his chest heaving, his dark eyes wide and fixed. His face was no longer a mask of cold professionalism, but a frightening portrait of unadulterated fury. His rage wasn't directed at the dead Mendoza man, or even at my escape attempt. It was directed at the near loss of his asset, the audacity of someone else laying a claim to what was his. He was my captor, bloodied and violent, and he had just risked his life to save mine. It was the last terrifying image I saw before the darkness. Deeper than the tunnels, swallowed me whole. Consciousness returned not as a rush, but as a slow, painful crawl. I woke to the scent of antiseptic and expensive linen. Gone were the marble and silk of the penthouse. I was in a room designed for discreet, high-cost recovery, a secret medical suite. The walls were a soothing shade of pale blue, and the bed, electronically adjusted, felt like it was floating. A drip fed fluid into my arm, and a doctor, not an assistant, checked my vitals with practiced silence before nodding and leaving the room. I was bruised and stitched, but alive. My focus immediately snapped to the figure seated in the armchair across the room. Ken. He was injured, but composed. A bandage wrapped tightly around his left forearm, and there was a deep laceration across his cheekbone that hadn't been there before, stitched with black thread. He looked exhausted, yet more dangerous than ever a wounded predator calculating its next move. Marco stood impassively by the door, his own arm in a sling, his presence a heavy, unmistakable security detail. I opened my mouth to apologize for the escape attempt, to stammer out thanks for my life, but Ken cut me off with a single, sharp gesture. "Don't insult my intelligence, Miss Carter," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of the previous day's swagger. It was a terrifying, flat sound. "You used your knowledge of the service tunnel to escape. Expected. You are irrelevant. Now, we talk about the senator's real plan." He leaned forward, his gaze locking mine, a cold, surgical assessment. The intel that led to our ambush, the initial tip about the courier and the archive route, it was all designed to fail. Not by the Mendoza Cartel, but by Senator Vance. He set us up to draw out the cartel, letting them compromise my compound while he moved the real documents somewhere else. Ken ran a hand across the stubble on his jaw. The documents were never in the archive building. They were in the adjoining power grid substation. Your archive knowledge was perfect, Lucy. Your analysis of the delivery schedules led my secondary team to that substation. It was your omission, the detail about the defunct keycard master server, that allowed my men to survive when the cartel hit my main floor. They were already out of the immediate blast radius. He paused, letting the weight of the realization settle. My betrayal of the archive had, ironically, saved the lives of his crew. You saved my lieutenants. The operation failed, but my inner circle did not, Ken stated, his approval delivered with chilling professional detachment. I realize now your value is not in maps, but in your mind. You think like the system, not like a criminal. That makes you the only person who can track Vance's counter-moves, because you are predictable only to yourself. He pulled a thin legal document from the inside pocket of his jacket and slid it onto the tray table beside my bed. It was printed on thick paper and signed in bold, sweeping strokes. "This is your new contract," Ken said, his eyes drilling into mine. The coerced agreement was finally laid bare. 1 year of guaranteed service. You continue to analyze, decipher, and predict. In return, I guarantee your safety. Your debt will be cleared, and at the end of 12 months, you will receive a new identity, a passport, and enough liquid assets to disappear forever. He then delivered the final, inescapable twist. And understand this, the man I shot outside? He was Mendoza. They waited for you because they knew you were the false courier, the piece of bait. By saving you tonight, I have confirmed to them that you are now my asset. Your life is no longer just on hold, Lucy. The Mendoza Cartel is now your enemy too. You belong here, fully dependent on my protection, or you die in the streets. He stood, his figure casting a long, intimidating shadow over the bed. You sign it, or you walk out that door, and I let Mendoza come find the girl who knows the inner workings of 2 crime syndicates. I looked at the promise of freedom and the threat of imminent death, realizing the lines were now impossibly blurred. The contract was a chain, but it was also the only shield I had left. Will Lucy sign the contract, cementing her place in Ken's world? And now that both Ken and the Mendoza Cartel believe her to be a crucial player, which threat is more dangerous? The man who saved her life, or the cartel hunting her for his mistake? Drop your comment below. The thin, signed document lay beside the bed, a certificate of my damnation and my temporary survival. I signed it. I had to. The ink on the paper felt cold and heavy, cementing my place as Ken's most reluctant and most crucial asset. The line between being a victim and a willing accomplice had vanished, replaced by a simple, brutal contract. Within 48 hours, I was moved from the medical suite to a dedicated office on the compound's 3rd floor. It was far less opulent than the penthouse, stark and functional, designed for work, not luxury. It contained triple monitors, secure network access, and stacks of hard copy documents, the salvaged remnants of the senator's portfolio. Marco was still my shadow, though now he stood guard over my work, not just my body. I was Ken's independent consultant, a title that dripped with cruel irony. My first official task was to track the real courier, Lydia Vance. Ken's men had searched for her using criminal channels, intercepting communications, running license plates. They looked for threats. I looked for digital ghosts. I cross-referenced university registration logs with utility records, checked the metadata of public social media profiles, and pulled up local municipal liens. I didn't find a spy. I found a 22-year-old student majoring in political science, drowning under the weight of her father's expectations. Lydia Vance wasn't running from danger. She was running from obligation. Her online life showed the cracks. Muted pleas for privacy, disdain for her father's political circles, and a crippling sense of being trapped. She was me, but with a different kind of debt. I was sifting through the senator's files, hundreds of digitized, non-sensitive documents Vance had apparently planted as red herrings when I found it. It wasn't encrypted, but hidden in plain sight. A coded watermark embedded in an old building permit for a defunct city hall extension. It was too specific, too niche for Ken's brute force methods to catch. It was addressed not to Ken, but to whomever next held the archive keys, a warning from one archivist to another. The cryptic message didn't mention money, politics, or the Mendoza Cartel. It referred to a date, a location, and a single, obscure family name, one that I recognized from my deep dives into the city's early 20th century corporate histories. The name was linked to a scandal involving massive real estate acquisition and organized crime that dated back 2 generations. The true secret in the senator's records wasn't financial leverage against Ken's operation. It was a key to Ken's own family history, a deeply buried weakness that could destroy the carefully constructed legitimacy of his entire syndicate. My fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing the name with old public records and digitized newspaper clippings. I found the connection, the lineage, and the shame that Vance must have intended to exploit. I walked directly to Ken's main office, the paper in my hand trembling slightly. Marco tried to stop me, but the urgent focus in my eyes must have communicated the gravity of the discovery. Ken was on a secure call, his back to me, but he turned as I entered, his usual cold composure intact. I laid the document on his mahogany desk, my voice low but firm, cutting straight to the core of his identity. "The senator wasn't after your money, was he, Ken?" I asked. The question was not a guess. It was a statement of fact. "He was after your name." Ken's eyes dropped to the paper. His polished mask, the one that defined him as the cold, calculating boss, did not crack. It shattered. His body went rigid, his face draining of color, replaced by a deep, terrifying crimson fury. He looked less like a crime CEO and more like a wild animal caught in a trap. He slammed his fist down on the desk, the impact echoing through the silent office. What is the explosive secret in Ken's family history that the senator intended to use? How will this revelation change Ken's priorities? And what terrifying task will he now assign to Lucy to protect his name? The sound of Ken's fist hitting the mahogany desk was not a crack, but a deafening, dull thud that vibrated through the floor. The paper I had laid down, the document revealing the corporate history of the name he carried, flew across the room, useless against the storm that had broken through his composure. His eyes, usually cold, were burning with a terrifying mix of shame and vengeance. "My father bought this city," Ken ground out, his voice low and vibrating with contained violence. Marco, ever present, did not move, but his massive frame tensed, ready for disaster. "He built the foundation of everything I control: land, contracts, loyalty. But there was a flaw in the deed, an original sin. The senator's grandfather, before he became a politician, was a minor clerk who was supposed to sign off on the final land sale 2 generations ago." Ken took a deep, ragged breath, regaining an ounce of his control. "The clerk never signed the municipal records. The senator holds the original, physical documentation proving that the land, this compound, the port contracts, the very ground my legitimacy rests on, was acquired illegally. It proves my family are squatters, not kings. He wasn't after money, he was after my name, Lucy. He wanted to strip away the only thing that distinguishes me from the low-level thugs Mendoza employs." The stakes had vaulted from a simple business feud to a battle for Ken's entire existence. The documents weren't assets, they were a death sentence for his empire. Just then, the compound's private line buzzed. Marco answered, his response quick and sharp. "Boss, they've located her. The real courier, Lydia Vance. She's making the final drop in the abandoned city hall annex, the one adjacent to the steam tunnel." Ken moved instantly, the animal rage dissolving into lethal focus. He grabbed his coat, checking the pistol holstered beneath his arm. This was it, the final mission, the reckoning with the senator. He paused at the door, his eyes sweeping across me, standing there, pale but steady, by his desk. "You stay here, Lucy. You are my firebreak. If I don't return, you destroy the hard drives. Every last fragment of the senator's information. If you ever use the information you found against me, I will not send Marco. I will come for you myself." The threat was absolute. Then, in a final, dizzying twist, he offered his hand. It was his left hand, the arm that had been bandaged, and it was entirely untattooed, the only piece of him that wasn't marked by his life. "Wish me luck, consultant." I took his hand. It was rough, warm, and the contact felt shockingly vulnerable, an unwritten contract of shared terror. As the door sealed behind him, locking me back into the silent, luxurious penthouse, I was no longer a frightened prisoner. I was a strategic partner, guarding the sensitive heart of his secrets. I was safe, but utterly trapped. I looked at the hand I had just shaken, then at the single, coded page I had slipped into my pocket before Ken's confrontation. I had the proof of his illegitimacy. My decision was instantaneous. I moved to the furthest corner of the penthouse, near the discreet panel Marco had exposed days ago. I pulled the steam tunnel access lever, opening the dark, metallic hatch I had saved for just this contingency. I had the contract promising freedom, and I had the secret that guaranteed my death if Ken ever caught me. I plunged into the darkness and slid down the vertical shaft. When I emerged into the cold night air of the alleyway, my heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. I was free. I started running, clutching the proof of Ken's vulnerability. Then I saw it. Parked a half-block away, blending perfectly into the shadows, was a black sedan, and behind the tinted glass of the driver's side, the dull reflection of a familiar scarred profile. Marco. I had escaped the cage, but I realized Marco wasn't watching the compound. He was watching the exit. I had my freedom, but I had crossed the line, and now belonged entirely to the world I had just run from. Did Lucy truly escape? Or has she merely traded one gilded cage for an infinitely more dangerous wilderness? Will she use the family secret to destroy Ken? Or will her complicated feelings compel her to protect the only man who can truly guarantee her survival? If you enjoyed the story and want to see the part 2, subscribe and comment part 2.